Okay, I'm gonna cut right to the chase. Will Leon S. Kennedy show up in this game, and will he die or not? Very bold statement there. A lot of hypotheticals. This video might age like milk, but I will explain my stance, and I'm gonna first explain will he show up in the game, period, because the only character that we saw so far is Grace Ashcroft. And you know, I don't think that she's gonna be the only protagonist in the game. There was a recent statement that was given by Koshi Nakanishi, and he only gave this video unlisted to Resident Evil ambassadors if they were platinum level. You know, they have the bronze level, which is the lowest, and then platinum, which is the highest. And if you're on this social media campaign, you can be posting Resident Evil articles, pics, reviews, things like that with the REBH fun hashtag, and you get points from that, and platinum is like the highest. And he gave out this video, and this was translated by YouTube, but the important thing is that he said the new protagonist is Grace, and it's a complete horror game from the protagonist's perspective. Perspective means that's her POV. Sometimes that one singular individual POV might mean multiple characters or multiple POVs at once, and I think that's what you're going to see with the ruination of Raccoon City. It's a no-brainer that reliving the past may have a triple meaning. Number one is Grace going back to the Renwood Hotel. Maybe she had some sort of remembrance of the past there with her mother's killer and trying to uncover the information from there. And then we move on to the player perspective when they saw Raccoon City. That elicited a reaction out of us because we were playing Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, all the way back in the past, all the way back in the 1990s, like 1998 or whatever, when RE2 came out. And that is a reaction to the player reliving the past, seeing this place all nuked out and going, holy shit, like we're back here at ground zero. We don't know what's lingering around here. We don't know what's different now. We don't know what's under the wreckage. That's another symptom of reliving the past. And then we move to a player character who has witnessed these events, who has been in the nightmare, whether it was in RE2 or RE3, and they will be reliving the past as well, almost 30 years later. And I think it's criminal if they don't have a legacy character that's been through all that shit go back to ground zero and experience that and tell their story to either Grace, the new protagonist, or something else. Something has to occur where this legacy character sees RPD in ruins and they are like, oh shit, it's like reliving the nightmare once again. It's something that's not uncommon, especially with Leon. He's the one who was at Tall Oaks, and he says just like Raccoon City all over again. Now it's going to be a similar fashion, but we're actually back here. We're actually back here 30 years fucking later and experiencing all of this stuff. And I believe that that legacy character will indeed make commentary on that, and Leon is one of the more probable characters to do so. Then we move on to the idea, and this is why I think Leon will probably show up, because of that notion, that theory. If he were to perish in this game, then it's not the first time that they try to do something equivalent to this fashion. Leon was originally supposed to die in Code Veronica and was meant to die in Resident Evil 3.5. In Code Veronica, they decided to replace him with Steve, meaning that Capcom wasn't bold enough to kill off the character because of popularity. And the second time he was supposed to die is in RE4, and they changed that as well. There's like some images around of certain parameters, and I think it was result screens of Leon having an affected arm, and I remember seeing that vividly, and I'm like, oh shit, Leon gets infected in this game. In the 3.5 version, he gets infected by the virus, and I would assume it was pretty much no way out after a certain point, and that was probably going to be Leon's last game. And popularity probably saved the character yet again, and they decided to go into a different route. This is what Capcom likes to do. This even mentions that Chris was supposed to die in RE6 and they changed it to Piers. And they seem to put new characters in the way of legacy characters to protect them in a sense, which is why if this game decides to go in an unorthodox direction, then putting the legacy character in front of the new characters and having them basically be a martyr, that would be something different this time around. If they do something like that, it's something that would be totally unexpected if they do that. And I believe a Resident Evil title has to come to this conclusion of what are you going to do with characters that you kept around for almost 30 years, and are you going to keep trying to do interesting stuff with them, give them plot armor, or are you going to let them bite the sacrificial bullet and have them pass on or retire? And those are questions that are valid to be asked, in my honest opinion. Now I'm gonna move on to another topic here, so I'm gonna kill the feed. And another reason why I believe that legacy characters should be retired at this point is because they're getting older. They're not getting any younger. Someone made a good point that yes, Barry was like super old and he was still fighting in the BSAA in Resident Evil Revelations 2. And I'm like, okay, I'll give you that point, but again, they're not getting any younger. If we look at the time of the release in lore of this game, which is Resident Evil usually goes by the release of the year that it's in, and they take place in the canon. There's a small couple of exceptions to the rule, but mostly speaking, it takes place in 2026, which is when Resident Evil Requiem releases, and Leon is going to be 47 years old, almost 50. In this game by the time Requiem comes out. And even if he lives in this game, there is a 15-year time jump from Shadows of Rose all the way to the end of the timeline, and that's getting older and older and older. How long are these geriatrics gonna keep going, right? So age is probably going to factor in, and when you get older, your joints get a little bit stiffer. You become, it's hard to do all these roundhouse kicks and somersaults and whatnot, and I would imagine that will probably start to factor into the skills of these characters eventually, because I mean, at the end of the day, age is going to catch up no matter what. The description of the game for Resident Evil Requiem, where they said it's gonna have more high stakes, it's gonna be ambitious, it's gonna have more scale, it's going to have survival horror with high stakes cinematic action. When they say cinematic and high stakes, I would, again, this is going to be a title where everything is riding on the line for the protagonist and the antagonist, and stakes coming back into Resident Evil is something we talked about before, where it's like, yeah, 6 tried to have a couple of stakes here or there, but it really didn't feel super like, oh well, it's the end of the world, everything, maybe for Chris' sake or Chaos or whatever, but they ultimately stopped the threat and you had a couple of new characters die or whatever. But them saying high stakes, ambitious scale, meaning is gonna be probably bigger than expected, and one of the ways they can increase scale is not only by introducing this big biohazardous outbreak that can affect the world, but personal character stories coming to an end. And they tried to teeter on that. If we specifically talk about that, they tried to teeter on that with RE6, and they didn't really commit to Chris, finally retiring out of there, which I think is kind of a failure on that behalf. But I did like his story for the most part with Piers and wanting to carry on the mantle, and Piers' dream of him dying for the BSAA, and Chris has to move on and carry that mantle with him as well. Yeah, it had a little bit of a symbolic touch, but nothing that really screamed like a finality at the end of those credits. And I believe with these high stakes, more is probably going to be on the line than ever before. And that's nice. But then if you have to talk about that, you have to talk about the idea of a person living or dying and a story ending, and thinking about the Raccoon City symbolism, right? Thinking about that, it goes full circle if Leon did die in this game, because once again, you have where it all started with him, which is RE2, Raccoon City. Once again, his first day job began here. The cop inside him died that day, and it was a nightmare he relived ever since in his mind, over and over and over. Once again, personal trauma coming back into fruition yet again. So him dying here at the ruins of RPD is once again weirdly symbolic, and it's almost kind of cruel. As I drop my cell phone piece on the floor, it's almost kind of cruel, but it almost, you know, makes perfect sense when you go full circle. And I believe that's probably what they're gonna go for if they try to heighten the story quite a bit. And the last part that I have to talk about is just passing the torch to a new character. This is something that's been on the mind of RE people for the longest time. It's like, look, I love Jill, I love Chris, I love Leon. Someone made a good point. I believe it was Center of Evil, where he said, you're still gonna get plenty of Leon in remakes, in spin-offs, in mercs. There's still the 15-year time skip or whatever if he does live, so you get to see even more Leon as a geriatric, right? We don't know how is going to be final, but if they do kill him in this game, you know, RE6, they could remake that. You're never going to stop seeing a lot of the character, even based on popularity's sake, because they can always do some side thing or spin-off or thing in the past at that point. And they could also keep him alive as well. We don't know, but I think if they do it in a way where, yes, this is full circle, yes, Ada was the one to die and fake death, quote unquote, and then Leon is the one to die for real. So it all would make some kind of relevant sense if they put in the pieces and make it work. I do think it's time for legacy characters to either be sunsetted, because you're gonna run into this problem where the status quo of the characters and the series stays the same with no alteration whatsoever. And once again, I do find it weird that one of the plot points of Resident Evil was indeed, it was in the files too, where Chris was kind of scared of another Wesker, you know, coming along, and he wanted to train the new generation in RE6. Therefore, if you keep killing off all your new characters, then you're not really building up those new people to have the torch carry with them, right? You have to get these new people in there, these new heroes, these new protagonists, and then it's like you can have a mixture of legacy character, then new character, but the new characters are gonna be the one to, you know, push it on. I mean, Rose has all these fucking powers, right? And she's gonna be part of Chris's group later on in the future. It's a no-brainer to have stuff like that there, and I hope they do have those conversations where it's like, BOWs are now on the front lines with us. They are right here, born and bred at this point in the timeline. So those are things to talk about, and they could lead to interesting storylines as well as offspring, because you have legacy characters now having babies, considering the fact that Grace is now a thing. So there's a lot of ways they could go into it. Personally speaking, you know, Leon's one of my favorite male characters in Resident Evil. It sucked to see him die, but if it's time, then it's time. This is a horror franchise, and after a certain point, you gotta think, am I gonna retire my favorite, or am I going to kill my favorite? And you know, it just leads to more story progression no matter what they pick. So I guess we'll see as time goes on. I don't know if the trailers are going to convey any of this. I highly doubt it, but if we see Leon sick or wounded or something like that, I think that'd be a cause for wondering, oh, they actually might go in this direction. They might toy with us too. I mean, we saw Jill Valentine gravestone with RE5. Anything can happen, I guess. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But what do you guys think of this video? Do you want them to start plucking off legacy characters? If Leon shows up, do you think it's symbolic for him to die in the RPD ruins? Sign off and let me know. And do you think the status quo is gonna change everything in this game? I believe already it's a radical concept as it is. Just going back and seeing all this shit and 30 years later, I definitely think there's going to be a little bit of a conclusion for some of these plot angles, and it has to be because there's still the plot angles that we need resolved from Village, right? With Chris and Jill and the BSA and everything. So it is getting big for its britches, and I do believe they're gonna slowly start answering and unraveling those questions, and the only way you can do that is to end off some of these loose threads. That's the only way. But until then, hopefully you guys enjoyed this discussion, and I will see you guys next time. Later.